The air was thick with tension in the dimly lit room. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering flames of a few sparse candles. It was July 17, 1918, and deep within the Ipatiev house in Ekaterinburg, a family awaited their fate. Tsar Nicholas Romanov II stood with his family, the last of the Romanov dynasty, their breaths shallow and hearts pounding. The sound of their breaths mingled with the distant murmur of the guards outside, a low hum of impending doom. The room smelled of dust and anticipation, an oppressive heat hanging in the air. Nicholas, once the ruler of all Russia, glanced around at his wife, Alexandra, and their children, each face marked with a mixture of fear and resolve. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows whispering of the empire that was no more. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the silence, a single decisive sound that echoed through the halls and down the corridors of history. But to understand how we got here, to this room of finality and fate, we must journey back through time. We must trace the footsteps of a man born into power and privilege, destined to rule a vast empire, a man whose reign would see the world change in ways few could have imagined. We must unravel the strands of political intrigue, personal decisions, and the relentless march of revolution that brought the Romanovs to this final stand. The story of Tsar Nicholas II is one of contrasts, of light and shadow, of power and its inevitable loss. It is a tale woven with the threads of history and human frailty, a narrative that begins long before the gunshots that ring out in Ekaterinburg. So let us step back, away from this moment of climax, into the beginning, where the seeds of destiny were first sown and the journey of the last Tsar truly began. In the gentle twilight of the late 19th century, Russia stood vast and sprawling, a land of endless forests, frozen tundras, and golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon. The air was crisp and carried the scent of pine and earth, whispering secrets of an empire both ancient and immense. It was in this world, on the 18th of May 1868, that Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov took his first breath. Born into the gilded halls of the Alexander Palace, he was cradled by tradition, duty, and the weight of 1,000 years of autocratic rule. Nicholas was the son of Tsar Alexander III, a man of towering presence and stern countenance, whose belief in absolute monarchy was as unyielding as the Russian winters. His mother, Empress Maria Feodorovna, brought warmth and elegance, her laughter a soft melody that danced through the ornate corridors of their home. Together, they crafted a world of privilege and order, where Nicholas and his siblings played beneath the watchful eyes of nannies and tutors, their lives a tapestry woven with history and expectation. The palace itself was a marvel, its walls adorned with intricate tapestries and grand portraits of Romanovs past, eyes forever gazing upon the lineage they had shaped. Chandeliers glittered like 1,000 stars, casting a warm glow over parquet floors polished to a mirror sheen. Outside, the gardens bloomed in a riot of color, the air heavy with the sweet fragrance of roses and lilacs, a sanctuary from the political storms brewing beyond its gates. Nicholas grew in this world of opulence, a world where the clink of crystal and the rustle of silk marked the passage of time. Yet beneath the surface of privilege and power, there lingered an undercurrent of unrest, a dissonance that foretold the challenges he would one day face. The empire was restless, its people yearning for change, for a voice in the destiny that bound them. Across the vast expanse of Russia, the seeds of discontent were sown in the fertile soil of oppression and poverty. The peasantry, bound by serfdom's legacy, toiled from dawn until dusk, their hands calloused and weary, their faces etched with lines of hardship. The land they tilled was not their own, and the fruits of their labor filled the coffers of the nobility, leaving them with little more than empty bellies and dreams of a better life. In the burgeoning cities, the Industrial Revolution roared to life. Factories spewed smoke into the air, a grim testament to progress and the price it exacted. The urban working class, a new force emerging from the shadows, labored in the deafening clatter of machinery. Their lives were a cacophony of sweat and toil, punctuated by the clang of iron and the hiss of steam. Dreams of reform and representation simmered within them, a quiet rebellion against the chains of autocracy. Amidst this backdrop of change and uncertainty, Nicholas navigated his youth. He was a man of contrasts, gentle yet firm, introspective yet resolute. His love for his family was boundless, his devotion to duty unwavering. Yet there was a reticence in him, a hesitancy that would become both his strength and his Achilles' heel. The mantle of leadership awaited him, a crown heavy with the expectations of a nation. As Nicholas came of age, he found solace and companionship in Alexandra, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria and his destined bride. Their love was a sanctuary, a refuge from the political maelstrom swirling around them. Alexandra was strong-willed and passionate, her heart beating fiercely for her husband and their children. Yet she, too, was a figure of controversy, her German roots and unwavering faith in Rasputin casting shadows over her public image. The world into which Nicholas stepped as Tsar was fraught with challenges. The echoes of the past reverberated through the halls of power, a reminder of the delicate balance between tradition and progress. The Russo-Japanese War, a conflict that emerged from the ambitions and rivalries of empires, cast a long shadow over his early reign. It was a war that tested the mettle of his leadership and exposed the fissures within the Russian state. Defeat in this distant conflict reverberated through the empire like a thunderclap, shaking the foundations of Nicholas's rule. The streets of St. Petersburg and Moscow teemed with unrest, a cacophony of voices demanding change. The cries of the people, once distant, now echoed within the palace walls, a stark reminder of the fragile nature of autocracy. In the midst of these trials, Nicholas clung to the belief in his divine right to rule. His vision was one of continuity and order, a steadfast adherence to the traditions that had guided his ancestors. Yet, the world around him was shifting, the tides of history inexorably pulling Russia toward revolution and transformation. Grigory Rasputin, a mystic from Siberia, emerged as a controversial figure within the royal court, his influence over the Romanovs both profound and polarizing. To Nicholas and Alexandra, he was a man of faith and healing, a presence that brought comfort in their hours of need. But to the Russian people, he was a symbol of corruption, an enigma whose shadow loomed large over the empire's fate. As the years passed, the tensions within Russia reached a boiling point. The Great War, a conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation, further strained the resources and resolve of the nation. The cries for reform grew louder, the demands for Nicholas to abdicate echoing through the corridors of power. It was against this backdrop of turmoil and transformation that Nicholas's reign drew to a close. The world he had inherited, a world of imperial splendor and autocratic rule, was fading into history. The Romanov dynasty, once the epitome of Russian might, stood on the brink of extinction, its legacy a testament to the complexities of power and the inexorable march of time. In the quiet moments before sleep, as the listener lies enveloped in darkness, the story of Nicholas Romanov II unfolds, a tale of rise and fall, of dreams and disillusionment. It is a story told in whispers, the echoes of a bygone era drifting through the corridors of memory like a gentle breeze, inviting reflection and repose. In the chill dawn of November 1894, the halls of the Winter Palace echoed with hushed footsteps as attendants moved with somber efficiency. Tsar Alexander III had breathed his last, leaving the Russian Empire in the hands of his son, Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the muted murmur of mourning. But beneath the grief lay a sense of expectancy. A new reign was beginning, and with it, the hope that the young Nicholas might steer Russia towards a brighter dawn. Nicholas, though, was no stranger to the weight of the crown. His upbringing was steeped in the traditions and expectations of the Romanov dynasty. Yet as he ascended the throne at the tender age of 26, his heart was filled with trepidation. He stood at the precipice of power, a reluctant sovereign in a time of ferment and change. The empire he inherited stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific, an expanse so vast it seemed to have no end. But its immensity was matched by its internal fractures, an empire simmering with unrest, where the clamor of the industrial age met the ancient, lingering echoes of serfdom. In the early days of his reign, Nicholas was buoyed by the support of his beloved wife, Alexandra. She was his confidant, his strength, as the couple embarked on their journey through the corridors of power. Their union was one of genuine affection, a rare warmth in the cold machinery of monarchy. And together, they dreamed of a future where their children might inherit a stable and prosperous Russia. Yet, even as Nicholas settled into his new role, the winds of change were rising. The late 19th century was a time of great transformation, and Russia was not immune to its forces. Industrialization was sweeping through the empire, bringing with it the clatter of machinery and the acrid scent of coal smoke. The cities swelled with workers, drawn by the promise of employment and a better life. But the reality was often harsh: long hours, low wages, and living conditions that strained the soul. The whisper of discontent began to grow louder, a murmur that would soon swell into a roar. Nicholas, however, remained steadfast in his belief in autocracy. He viewed the reforms suggested by advisors and political figures with suspicion, seeing them as threats to the divine right of the Tsar. His father, Alexander III, had been a staunch conservative, and Nicholas sought to emulate his father's strength and resolve. Yet, where Alexander had been decisive, Nicholas vacillated, unsure of how to navigate the complexities of a modernizing world. The first major test of his leadership came with the Russo-Japanese War. In 1904, tensions with Japan over territories in East Asia erupted into conflict. Nicholas, buoyed by a sense of patriotic duty and assurances from his military advisors, believed that a swift victory would not only expand Russia's influence, but also quell growing unrest at home. The reality, however, was far different. The war was disastrous for Russia, humiliating defeats, logistical failures, and staggering loss of life. The empire's mighty navy was decimated in the Battle of Tsushima, the waters churning with flames and debris as Russian ships sank beneath the waves. The war's ignominious end in 1905 was a turning point. It shattered the illusion of Russian invincibility and exposed the frailty of Nicholas's regime. The aftermath saw the rise of revolutionary fervor as workers and peasants alike began to clamor for change. In the cities, strikes and protests erupted, their cries echoing through the streets like thunder. The scent of gunpowder and the acrid tang of smoke filled the air as clashes between demonstrators and authorities turned bloody. In response, Nicholas reluctantly agreed to the creation of the Duma, a legislative body meant to placate the masses and quell the unrest. But even as he signed the October Manifesto, promising reforms and greater political freedom, Nicholas's heart was heavy with reluctance. He saw the Duma not as a partner in governance, but as an adversary, a body to be controlled and circumvented. His commitment to autocracy remained unshaken, and he soon began to undermine the very institution he had created. As the years rolled on, the empire remained a cauldron of seething tensions. The urban working class, the peasantry, and the intelligentsia all were growing restless under the weight of oppression and stagnation. Yet, in the gilded halls of the Winter Palace, life continued with an air of oblivious opulence. The court was a world of banquets and balls, where the scent of roses mingled with the strains of Strauss waltzes, and where the realities of the wider world seemed a distant echo. The figure of Grigory Rasputin loomed large in this world. A mystic from Siberia, Rasputin had gained the trust of the imperial family, particularly Alexandra, who believed he could heal their hemophiliac son, Alexei. Rasputin's influence grew, his presence a shadow over the court. His coarse manners and dubious morals alienated many, but to Nicholas and Alexandra he was a spiritual guide and a source of comfort amid the storm. Yet for the people of Russia, Rasputin became a symbol of all that was wrong with the regime. Whispers of his debauchery and undue influence over the Tsar and Tsarina spread like wildfire, fueling the fires of discontent. The empire teetered on the brink, the gap between the rulers and the ruled widening with each passing day. As the specter of war loomed once more, Nicholas found himself caught in the tides of history. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 plunged Europe into the abyss of World War I. Nicholas, driven by loyalty to his allies and a sense of destiny, led Russia into the conflict. The war was a brutal, grinding affair, its battlefields a morass of mud, blood, and despair. The Russian army, ill-equipped and poorly led, suffered catastrophic losses. At home, food shortages and economic collapse fanned the flames of revolution. By the winter of 1917, the empire was unraveling. The capital, Petrograd, was a city on edge, its streets filled with the clamor of dissent. The cries of peace, bread, and land rang out, a desperate plea from a people pushed to the brink. Nicholas, isolated and out of touch, clung to his belief in divine right, even as the world crumbled around him. The abdication of Nicholas on March 15, 1917 was both inevitable and shocking. The man who had once been the ruler of an empire now found himself a prisoner of history. As he signed the document that relinquished his throne, the ink barely dry, a chapter of Russian history closed. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled for over 300 years, was no more. And so Nicholas's ascent, marked by hope and missteps, came to an end. The empire he had inherited was gone, transformed by the forces of revolution and change. As he and his family faced an uncertain future, the echoes of his reign lingered, a reminder of a world that had once been and a harbinger of the one that was yet to come. The air was thick with the scent of burning coal, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the streets of St. Petersburg. It was January 22, 1905, a day that would forever alter the course of Russian history. In the chill of the winter morning, a vast crowd gathered beneath the imposing shadow of the Winter Palace. Men, women, and children, peasants and workers alike, had come to voice their grievances, clutching icons and portraits of Nicholas II, believing he was their protector, unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Father Georgy Gapan, a charismatic priest, led the procession. He moved with a quiet fervor, his breath visible in the cold, as he implored the masses to remain peaceful. But beneath the veneer of calm, there was a palpable tension, a tension that crackled in the frigid air like distant thunder. Inside the Winter Palace, Nicholas was not present. On that fateful day, he remained at Tsarskoye Selo, unaware of the magnitude of the storm brewing in the heart of his empire. The Tsar's ministers, however, were not oblivious, and their nerves were fraying. General Dmitry Trepov, the governor of St. Petersburg, glanced anxiously at the clock, each tick a reminder of the growing unrest outside. And then, the moment of crisis arrived. The peaceful demonstration, a plea for better working conditions and personal freedoms, was met with a wall of imperial guards. Orders were given, orders that would change everything. Shots rang out, piercing the cold air, mingling with the panicked cries of the crowd. The snow, once pristine, was stained red as bodies fell, the hopes of the people shattered in an instant. This event, Bloody Sunday, marked the beginning of the end for Nicholas's reign. News of the massacre spread like wildfire, igniting a wave of strikes and uprisings across the empire. The sound of factory whistles, once a symbol of industry, now signaled rebellion. Railways were disrupted, telegraph lines hummed with messages of dissent, and the streets were alive with the murmur of revolution. In the days that followed, the Tsar was confronted with an undeniable truth. The people no longer saw him as their father, but as a distant figurehead, detached from their suffering. Nicholas, in his opulent chambers, felt the weight of the crown grow heavier, the burden of autocracy pressing against his very soul. His resolve to maintain absolute power, once firm, began to waver under the relentless tide of change. Yet amidst the chaos, Nicholas found solace in his family. Alexandra, his devoted wife, offered unwavering support, her presence a balm to his troubled heart. Together with their children, they retreated to the Alexander Palace, seeking refuge from the storm that raged outside. But even within the sanctuary of their home, the echoes of discontent could not be silenced. The crisis was not confined to the streets alone. Far to the east, the Russo-Japanese War raged on, a conflict born of imperial ambition and miscalculation. Nicholas had believed in a swift victory, but the reality was a series of humiliating defeats that undermined his authority further. Port Arthur fell, and the Russian fleet lay in ruins at Tsushima. The human cost was staggering. Thousands of soldiers perished, their bodies claimed by the unforgiving sea. As the war dragged on, the Russian people bore the brunt of its toll. Food shortages became commonplace, and the once vibrant markets were overshadowed by the specter of hunger. The cries of hungry children echoed through the narrow alleys, a haunting reminder of the Tsar's failures. The empire, vast and seemingly unbreakable, was fracturing at its very core. In the wake of these dual crises, Nicholas faced a choice: reform or repression. The Tsar, torn between his ideals and the demands of a changing world, hesitated. His ministers urged him to grant concessions, to heed the cries of his people, but Nicholas's heart was anchored in the past. Autocracy was all he had known, and to relinquish it felt akin to betrayal. Yet, in October 1905, he relented, issuing the October Manifesto. It promised a semblance of constitutional monarchy, a Duma, a parliamentary body, to represent the people. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide might turn, that Nicholas could steer his empire toward a brighter future. But the reprieve was brief. The Duma, seen as a symbol of hope, was quickly undermined by the Tsar's reluctance to cede real power. Nicholas's distrust of reform, coupled with Alexandra's influence and Rasputin's growing presence, sowed seeds of discord that took root in the hearts of many. As the years passed, the specter of crisis loomed ever larger. The revolution simmered beneath the surface, a relentless force waiting to erupt. Nicholas, trapped in a web of his own making, stood on the precipice, unable to see the abyss that lay ahead. By 1914, as Europe edged toward war, the sound of marching boots and the clatter of rifles echoed once more across Russia. The Great War, World War I, had begun, drawing Nicholas into a conflict that would be his undoing. The initial surge of patriotism soon gave way to despair, as the realities of war, trench warfare, staggering casualties, and economic strain took their toll. Nicholas, ever resolute, took command of the Russian forces, leaving the governance of his empire in the hands of Alexandra and Rasputin. It was a decision fraught with peril, one that would further alienate him from his people and his ministers. The gulf between the Tsar and his subjects widened, the chasm so vast that it threatened to swallow the empire whole. And so, as the war raged on and the fires of revolution burned ever brighter, Nicholas faced the greatest crisis of his life. The choices he made, the paths he chose, would shape not only his destiny, but the fate of Russia itself. In the quiet moments, as he gazed upon the portraits of his ancestors and the shimmering icon of the Savior, Nicholas must have wondered if he could have changed the course of history, if he could have saved his family, his dynasty, his empire. But the sands of time were slipping through his fingers, and the echoes of crisis reverberated, a haunting lullaby that would accompany him into the night. The end was near, and in the silence of his heart, Nicholas could feel its approach, as inevitable as the dawn. As the winter sun began to dip below the horizon, the gilded halls of the Winter Palace stood silent, echoing the uncertainty that gripped the Russian Empire. It was 1905, and the air was thick with the chill of discontent. Nicholas II, once a young and hopeful sovereign, now found himself ensnared in the web of his own unwavering beliefs. The year had begun with bloodshed on the cobblestones of St. Petersburg, and as the days grew shorter, the shadows cast by the empire's troubles only lengthened. The Russo-Japanese War, a conflict that had once seemed a distant challenge, now loomed large and menacing. It had not been the swift victory Nicholas had envisioned. Far from the gilded confines of the Winter Palace, the Russian fleet lay wrecked at Tsushima in May of 1905, a devastating defeat that sent shockwaves through the empire. The once mighty armada, shattered and silent, now rested beneath the cold waves, a testament to the failure of Russian might. In the heart of St. Petersburg, the city buzzed with whispers of revolution. The scent of coal smoke and the metallic tang of industry mingled with the acrid odor of discontent. Workers, soldiers, and intellectuals gathered in dimly lit rooms, their voices rising in impassioned debate. The seeds of change took root in those clandestine assemblies, nurtured by the fertile soil of suffering and unmet promises. Within the Alexander Palace, Nicholas and Alexandra clung tightly to their beliefs, seeking solace in the familiar routines of family life. Yet even here, amidst the laughter of their children and the soft rustle of silk curtains, the specter of Rasputin began to cast its long shadow. The mystic, with his piercing eyes and enigmatic presence, became an advisor whose influence grew, much to the chagrin of the court and the broader populace. The turning point came not with a single battle or decree, but with the tide of revolution that swept across the land. In October 1905, unrest reached a crescendo as strikes paralyzed industries, and workers took to the streets with fervor. The air was electric with possibility and peril, a cacophony of voices demanding change, demanding justice. Nicholas, beset by a storm of challenges, reluctantly agreed to concessions, the October Manifesto. This document promised a semblance of freedom, a Duma, a voice for the people. Yet it was a promise born of necessity, not conviction. The ink on the manifesto was barely dry before Nicholas's heart wavered, and his resolve to maintain autocratic control reasserted itself. The streets of St. Petersburg bore witness to the seismic shifts. The cobblestones vibrated beneath the feet of marchers, their shouts mingling with the clattering of horse-drawn carriages and the distant ring of church bells. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in the hearts of the people. But in the opulent residences of the ruling class, fear mingled with disdain, as whispers of betrayal and unrest seeped through the corridors. In the midst of this upheaval, a solitary figure navigated the delicate balance between loyalty and change. Father Georgy Gapon, a priest turned revolutionary, had walked the line between two worlds. His actions on Bloody Sunday had marked him as both hero and traitor, a man caught between the crosshairs of history. Now he found himself in exile, his voice silenced, yet echoing in the hearts of those he had inspired. As the year drew to a close, the empire appeared to settle into a fragile peace. Yet it was the eye of the storm, a deceptive calm that belied the turbulence beneath. Nicholas, though momentarily relieved, remained steadfast in his belief in autocracy. The concessions he had made were seen by many as mere illusions, a facade that could not withstand the weight of reality. In the years that followed, the world around Nicholas continued to shift. The war in the East drew to a close, but the scars it left on the Russian psyche remained. The streets that once echoed with the cries of revolution were now haunted by the memories of lives lost and dreams deferred. Rasputin, the mystic who had become an unlikely confidant to the royal family, wielded influence with an enigmatic charm that both captivated and repulsed. His presence within the palace walls deepened the chasm between Nicholas and his people, a chasm that grew ever wider with each passing year. By the time the empire found itself dragged into the maelstrom of World War I, the nation was already a tinderbox waiting for a spark. That spark came with the February Revolution of 1917, when the streets once again erupted with the cries of the people. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the acrid smoke of burning barricades. The end of the Romanov dynasty approached, inexorable and unyielding. Nicholas, faced with the impossible choice between his duty to the throne and the welfare of his people, chose to abdicate. On March 15, 1917, in a humble railway carriage, he signed away 3 centuries of Romanov rule, his pen scratching across the paper with a finality that resonated through history. The world had shifted irrevocably, and Nicholas, once a symbol of imperial grandeur, now found himself a prisoner in his own land. Under house arrest in the Ipatiev house in Ekaterinburg, the former Tsar and his family awaited their fate. The air within those walls was heavy with anticipation and dread, a silence broken only by the soft murmur of prayers and the gentle rustle of clothing. On a fateful night in July 1918, the echoes of history reached their shattering crescendo. The Romanovs, the last of their line, were led into a dimly lit cellar. The air was cool and stale, the walls closing in with an oppressive weight. In those final moments, the world outside held its breath, as the last flickers of Imperial Russia were extinguished. Yet even in darkness, the story of Nicholas Romanov endures, a tale woven with the threads of hope and hubris, of dreams and despair. As the echoes of the past fade into the gentle embrace of sleep, the legacy of the last Tsar lingers, whispering from the shadows of time. In the echoing silence that followed the fall of the Romanovs, Russia found itself on the precipice of a new and uncertain dawn. The air, thick with the scent of gunpowder and revolution, hung heavy over the streets of Ekaterinburg and beyond. The world had tilted on its axis, leaving behind a landscape of shattered dreams and fragmented loyalties. In the heart of this upheaval, the soul of Russia trembled, caught between the vestiges of its imperial past and the fervent cries for change that surged through its veins. As the summer of 1918 gave way to the cool, crisp breath of autumn, the dust had barely begun to settle. The Romanov family, once ensconced in the opulence of palaces and the luxurious confines of their royal life, were now but whispers on the wind. Their execution, a stark and unyielding finale to a dynasty that had ruled for over 3 centuries, marked not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a colossal transformation. The Russian Empire, once sprawling and seemingly indomitable, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. its vast territories now teetering on the brink of chaos. In the weeks that followed, the city of Ekaterinburg was a tapestry of stark contrasts. The blood-stained walls of the Ipatiev house bore silent witness to the brutal end met by the last Tsar and his family, while outside, life continued with an eerie semblance of normalcy. The muffled clatter of horse-drawn carriages echoed down cobblestone streets, where vendors hawked their wares with a nervous energy, eyes flicking toward the horizon, searching for signs of change. There was a sense of foreboding that clung to the air, a palpable tension that seeped into every crevice of the city. For those who survived the tumult, the task of rebuilding was daunting. Families torn apart by war and revolution sought to piece together their lives amidst the ruins of what once was. The peasantry, who had borne the brunt of the empire's inequities, now found themselves grappling with the complexities of newfound freedom. Land, once a distant dream, was now theirs to claim, an opportunity that was both exhilarating and fraught with uncertainty. The soil beneath their feet was rich with promise, yet it carried the weight of centuries of toil and oppression. In the urban centers, the working class faced their own set of trials. Factories that had once driven the engine of the empire's industrial might now stood silent, hulking skeletons of iron and steel, waiting for the breath of life to return. The cacophony of machinery was replaced by the quiet murmur of hope and despair, as workers gathered in hushed circles to discuss their future. The scent of coal dust mingled with the sweat of laborers, weaving a tapestry of resilience and determination into the fabric of their daily lives. Amidst this backdrop of hardship and hope, the political landscape of Russia was undergoing a seismic shift. The Bolsheviks, emboldened by their triumph, set about dismantling the remnants of the old regime with a fervor that bordered on zealotry. Lenin's vision of a communist utopia began to take shape, its foundations laid upon the ashes of the past. Yet for many, the promise of equality and prosperity seemed as distant as ever, a shimmering mirage on the horizon of an uncertain future. In the corridors of power, new alliances were forged and old ones shattered. The scent of cigars and the rustle of paper filled rooms where decisions were made that would shape the destiny of millions. Across the vast expanse of Russia, from the bustling streets of Moscow to the frozen reaches of Siberia, the people waited with bated breath, caught in a delicate dance between fear and anticipation. The chill of winter crept inexorably closer, a reminder of the harsh realities that lay ahead. For the Romanovs, their story had reached its conclusion, yet their legacy lingered, a ghost haunting the corridors of history. In the hearts of those who had known them, memories flickered like candle flames, casting shadows that stretched across the years. The scent of lavender and the soft rustle of silk whispered of a time when the world was different, a time when the future seemed bright and the possibilities endless. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed to hold its breath, the tales of those who had lived through the tumult were shared, passed down from generation to generation like precious heirlooms. The sound of a father's voice recounting the days of the Tsar, the feel of a grandmother's hand tracing the lines of a well-worn photograph. These were the threads that wove the tapestry of memory, binding the past to the present in an unbreakable bond. As the year drew to a close, the first snows began to fall, blanketing the land in a soft, white silence. The world, it seemed, was ready to begin anew. For Russia, the journey ahead was fraught with challenges, yet it was a journey that held the promise of rebirth. The echoes of the past would linger, but they would not define the path forward. In the stillness of a winter's night, as the stars blinked silently overhead, the people of Russia dreamed of a future yet unwritten, one where the lessons of history could light the way to a brighter tomorrow. And so, with each passing day, the story of Russia continued to unfold, an epic tale of resilience and transformation, set against the backdrop of a world in flux. The whispers of the past mingled with the hopes of the future, creating a symphony of change that resonated through the corridors of time. As the final notes of the Romanov legacy faded into the night, the dawn of a new era awaited, its first light casting long shadows on the journey ahead. In the quietude of history's long corridors, the echoes of Tsar Nicholas II's reign continued to reverberate, softly yet persistently. His story, woven into the fabric of the past, became a tapestry of myth and memory, coloring the minds of those who would come after. In the chill of a Russian winter, January's breath visible in the air, one can almost hear the whispers of the Romanov legacy drifting through the snow-laden streets of old Moscow. As the last vestiges of Imperial Russia faded, the Romanov dynasty was relegated to the annals of bygone eras. Yet, in the decades and centuries that followed, their saga became a wellspring of fascination and debate. The world looked back on the opulence of the imperial court with a mixture of awe and reproach. The glittering chandeliers of the Winter Palace, the lavish balls, the gilded halls, all were tinged with the shadows of tragedy and loss. The fall of Nicholas and his family marked a seismic shift, not only for Russia, but for the world. The echoes of revolution rippled across continents, inspiring movements and inciting fears in equal measure. The specter of communism, born from the ashes of the Romanovs, spread its influence far beyond the borders of the Soviet Union. The world watched as an empire crumbled and a new ideology took root, a seedling that would grow, twist, and spread its branches across the globe. In the West, Nicholas was often remembered as the tragic Tsar, a man ill-prepared for the weight of a crown. His image was painted in broad strokes of pity and condemnation, a ruler caught between eras, clinging to the old world as the new one surged forth with unrelenting force. The tales of Rasputin, that enigmatic mystic with eyes like smoldering coals, added a layer of mystique to the narrative, as if the Romanovs' fate was sealed by a blend of divine intervention and dark intrigue. For the Russian people, the memory of Nicholas II was more complex. To some, he was a martyr, a saint of the Orthodox Church, canonized alongside his family. Churches were built in their honor, and their faces adorned icons, revered by those who saw them as victims of a brutal, godless regime. Others, however, viewed him as the embodiment of autocratic failure, a symbol of a system that could not withstand the tides of change. The streets of St. Petersburg, once lined with banners of imperial glory, now bore witness to the march of proletarian progress. As time flowed onward, myths and truths intertwined, creating a narrative as intricate as the Russian soul itself. The Romanovs became characters in countless stories, books, films, operas, all seeking to capture the essence of a family torn from their throne and thrust into the unforgiving jaws of revolution. These retellings, often romanticized or vilified, served to keep the memory alive, even as the world around them continued to evolve. In the realm of what-ifs and might-have-beens, historians and scholars pondered the legacy of Nicholas II. What if the Tsar had embraced reform with greater fervor? What if Rasputin had never entered the royal circle? What if the revolution had not been inevitable? These questions, like the snowflakes that dance endlessly over Siberian plains, remain suspended in the air, unanswerable, yet eternally present. Yet, beyond the myths and speculation, the world undeniably changed because of the events set in motion by Nicholas's reign. The fall of the Romanovs heralded a new era of political thought, one where the ideas of equality and class struggle permeated global consciousness. The Russian Revolution, a cataclysmic event, became a blueprint for other nations, both a warning and a beacon, depending on one's perspective. In the silence of the night, as listeners drift into dreams, one might consider what was lost with the end of the Romanov dynasty. It was not merely a family or a way of ruling, but a bridge between the ancient and the modern, a connection to a time when empires stretched across the earth like great sprawling maps. The world lost a measure of its mystery, its sense of the unknown, as the old order gave way to the relentless march of progress. Yet, amidst the loss, there were gains, new opportunities for voices once silenced, for ideas once suppressed. The fall of the Romanovs allowed for the growth of something new, something that would continue to shape the destinies of nations and peoples. In this way, Nicholas's legacy is both a shadow and a light, a reminder of the past and a harbinger of the future. As the narrative draws to a close, and the gentle cadence of words settles like a soft blanket over the listener, one is left with a sense of the profound interconnectedness of history. The story of Nicholas II and the Romanovs is but one thread in the vast tapestry of human experience, a thread that, while it may have ended in tragedy, continues to weave its way through the hearts and minds of those who seek to understand the world. And so, as the final notes of the tale linger in the air, Fading into the stillness of the night, the listener is gently lulled into the embrace of sleep. The story of Nicholas Romanov, the last Tsar of Russia, becomes a part of the dreamscape, a whisper in the darkness, a legacy that will never be forgotten. In the quiet stillness of a world on the cusp of dreams, the tale of Tsar Nicholas II unfolds like a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, love, and the inexorable march of time. His life, a delicate dance between power and vulnerability, mirrors the eternal struggle within the human soul, a yearning for greatness tempered by the shadows of our frailties. Here was a man born into the opulence of a gilded cage, yet bound by the weight of history and the expectations of an empire. The scent of candle wax and aging leather fills the halls where he walked, each step echoing with the whispers of ancestors. Nicholas's reign, fraught with turmoil and resistance, speaks to the fragile nature of authority. His steadfast adherence to autocracy, like an iron chain, bound him to the past, even as the world around him cried for change. In the soft glow of twilight, we see the contours of his decisions, each a reflection of the complex web of love and duty that ensnared him. Love for his family, love for tradition, love for a vision of Russia that was slipping away like sand through his fingers. Yet amidst the echoes of revolution and the clamor of dissent, there is a quiet resilience in the human spirit. It is the same resilience that saw the Romanovs canonized and their story retold through generations, a testament to survival beyond the grave. Their legacy, etched in the annals of history, reminds us that power is fleeting, yet the essence of who we are endures. As the shadows lengthen and the night deepens, this story lingers, an invitation to ponder the delicate balance of ambition and humility, the enduring power of love, and the lessons nestled within our failures. Let the gentle rhythm of these reflections cradle you into sleep, where dreams intertwine with the whispers of a bygone era, waiting to reveal their secrets in the quiet embrace of night.